Okay, so let's talk a little bit about drag shutter. So dragging your shutter for parts of the wedding day, such as, the party time during the reception, everybody's down on the dance floor getting after it. I find it that dragging the shutter can add a little bit of a fun, vibey element to it. In this specific example that we see right here, there aren't a lot of light sources that were streaking through the photo in the direction that I was shooting at, but it still adds that kind of feel. It fills the frame, can be fun and add an element of, I don't know, it feels clubby, it feels like a party. That's why I like dragging the shutter during this type of moment in the wedding day. However, I don't use it for every single couple. There's certain couples that it might not fit the style. So I pick and choose when I do it. But I find myself most of the time using it. I would say about 75% of the times I'll shoot like this. And even if it's a couple that doesn't fit the vibe of it, I still shoot a couple so I have just in case, but maybe not the entire dance party, right? Let's begin by talking kind of the approach for the setup. There's a couple of things that are always the same for me whenever I'm shooting these drag shutter shots. Some people might think that my settings are a little bit slow in shutter speed, but that's the number that I found that's magic for me with my setup. To begin is I set my shutter speed at 1/5 of a second, sometimes a 1/10 of a second. Just depends how much I want to whip my camera around, and it also depends on what flash unit I have on my camera. Specifically, right now I'm shooting with a Godox V1. That's the speed light with a round head on it. I like Godox because it has the rechargeable batteries, the lithium batteries, and that they last a long time, and they have a lot of output power. Okay, so I start with my shutter speed at 1/5 of a second. The next thing I'm gonna do is that's the beginning point for dragging shutter. What that's gonna do is gonna release that shutter at a slower pace, which is gonna allow more light to come in, and that's how you get those streaks of light. You want to have the main light source on your subject not be the ambient light. You only want the light source of your flash that's mounted on camera to be the main light source, lighting up your subject. The reason being is that if there's too much ambient light coming into your camera, making its way into the photo, you're going to get what's called ghosting. You might see that in some of your photos sometimes if you're trying this effect and you see like their outline of the subject is dragging a little bit, or you see like there's two of them in the picture, there's a little bit of a ghosting effect going on. That's because your camera is picking up too much ambient light and it's not allowing your flash to be the one and only source that lights up your subject. So to avoid that, what I like to do is before you even turn on your flash, I have a couple of steps when I teach this. Is first, set your shutter speed to what you want it to be, whether it be 1/5 of a second or 1/10 of a second. Then I want you to go ahead and take a photo. And when you take this photo, the only thing that should be showing up is the light sources that you want to streak through your picture when you're dragging that shutter. So that could be the DJ lights, that should be candle lights, that could be the string lights, any kind of light source like that. That should be the only one showing up. The rest of the things should be kind of really, really dark. You'll begin basically a picture of all black except the light sources that you want streaking through your photo. Once you turn on your flash, all that darkness, it's gonna allow for the ghosting to not be taking place. So your ambient light is not influencing what your subject looks like. Only your flash is gonna influence the exposure of your subject, if that makes sense. Okay. So we've set our shutter speed to 1/5 or 1/10 of a second. The next step is going to be when you take that photo, if everything's still too bright, you're going to go up on your aperture. So that's what you see here. My aperture is 5.6. Not only it is to kind of do away with that ambient light. In this case, we were indoors, so it was a little bit of overhead lighting. So I brought my aperture to 5.6 to kind of dim that down, but also is during this time of dancing, there's a lot of motion. They're moving to and from your camera, you're moving around a little bit, so there's a lot happening. So you want to be able to have not a shallow depth of field, you want a deep, more in focus. So the higher you go, so 5-6, more is going to be in focus. So if you're freehand shooting, you're not necessarily looking through, you're just kind of catching a moment, don't want to miss it. Being on a higher aperture is going to be way more forgiving, and it's going to enable you to get the shot without worrying about getting the focus perfect so much. So 5.6 is kind of a magic number for me there. The ISO is going to stay really low for me because, once again, I'm not trying to use ambient light as a light source to light my subjects. My flash is going to do that. So my ISO is going to be low, my aperture is going to be a little bit higher, my shutter speed is going to be low and slow. Next thing I do is I pop on my flash, I turn on my flash, and I start at the lowest power. So some flashes go to 1/256 of power or 1/28. You just set whatever is the lowest output of your flash, start there. Take a photo, see how it looks, and slowly work your way at higher power until you get the desired look on your couple. For my setup, the way I like to do it is I like to do my flash pointed straight out. So I don't bounce. For this type of thing, I go straight on, which is going to take a lot less output because the light's going directly at your subject. I'm on a wider lens. These dance photos, I'm normally on a 24 millimeter. So I'm going to be really close, which also ensures that the output power can be lower on my flash unit. I'm usually trying to have my flash output be lower so that it's more flattering. B, it can cycle quicker, so the time between flashes is shorter, meaning you let that flash go off and it needs to now recharge to be able to go off again. So the lower the power is, the quicker it's going to be able to recycle and be ready to go again. And also, not to mention, you're not going to run through your batteries as fast if you have a lower output. So that's the other benefit of it. But I have it straight out my couples to get that like old Hollywood paparazzi feel. And I like the hard shadows that come out of it. So sometimes I've used a MagMod Sphere on there if I'm going to be using gels to balance out the light temperatures and all that. But it depends. Most of the times I have just the bare Mag Sphere or no Mag Sphere at all. In this case, right here, this photo that you see, the settings were, as I said, 1/25, 5/6, 2/50th of a second. My white balance is going to be set to whatever temperature your flash is. Each flash has a little bit of a variant. In this case, I had a gel on it to match the ambient light. So I was at 3900 Kelvin is where I was at, because I put a color tone orange gel on that Mag Sphere. And this is the result that I got. So this is pretty much straight out of camera. I mean, some of the color correcting, but exposure wise, I didn't change anything. This is exactly what the photo came out as. And what I did to get the streaks going up like that, the initial shot, you know, the shot that you see here of the bride with the cowboy hat on, that flash went off and froze that moment. And then after the flash went on, what I did was I souped the camera down. And what souping that camera down as soon as I released the shutter did was drag those little candles that were on the table that were my light source up and towards the right corner, right? So the motion, the way it looks is when I take that photo, I go ahead and I push my shutter, and as soon as I push my shutter, I just choop. So I'm pushing the shutter, the flash releases, it freezes a moment, it captures my subject, and I swoop right away to get that light streak going up. So when you see me on the dance floor, this is going to be me the entire time. You might look like a weirdo, but you're going to get some cool photos. So that's kind of the motion, is whoop, whoop, and that's how you get that streaking going upwards. A couple of tips is always be mindful of where your streaks are going to go. You don't want to, in this case, if I would have swooped left and up, the streaks would have gone from here, this is the source. See right there, those bright little spots, the streaks would have gone straight through her face. So if I shot it and I went that way, it would have sent the streaks going straight across and down. It would have crossed her face and all of that. So that's why I went down and to the left, so that the streaks would go up and away from her face, bringing that kind of focus on her. And even these streaks right here are kind of pointing towards her, leading your eye to the bride playing with a cowboy hat. And this specific photo is a perfect example of the, you know, the great thing it is to bring your aperture up higher, to have that forgiving focus. Because I shot this freehand, I didn't even focus. One thing I do is, before I get on the dance floor, I put the camera to my eye, I look down to the ground, and I focus on the ground, so that distance between my head to the ground is kind of the distance that I'm gonna be from my subject. I'm never gonna be closer than that. I mean, I'm gonna be closer, but it's always gonna be pretty close to that distance between my eye and the floor. And then I don't focus again unless I absolutely have to, but I try to maintain that imaginary distance in my mind when I'm shooting these photos. If I feel like I'm gonna be closer, I'll probably crouch down a little bit and focus a little bit closer, but I just keep that focus there at all times, so I'm not refocusing before every shot and missing moments. This moment happened so quick. I was in the dance floor, I turn around, I hear people kind of like yelling and like laughing, and I turn around and I saw this moment, and that's when I literally turned and I shot it, and then the moment passed. So if you're not, that's why I like this type of approach to the dance floor photos, is that you want to be ready to capture that stuff. And if you're not ready, you're not set up in a way that you can quickly take the photo and know it's going to come out well, you know, you might miss it, right? So that's why I like setting my focus and not refocusing before every shot unless you have the time to. But these type of photos, you're going to miss if you're trying to focus. You know, by the time you refocus, the moment's passed. So that's a couple of tips that I have for you when it comes to dragging the shutter. I hope that made sense. I know it's a lot of information, but the best thing you can do is practice. And this is something you can practice at home. You don't have to necessarily be at an event. You can turn the lights off at your house, turn on a couple of candles, or turn on a couple of just overhead lights, and just bring your exposure down and your aperture up, and make it dark in that room so that the only light source shining on your subject will be your flash, but the lights that are ambient, still the sources, will just be barely bright dots. And just kind of mess around with it and have fun. And yeah, I hope that this was helpful. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments and I'll get to it.